What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin coming back with a box office breakdown where we saw Dungeons and Dragons overperform, but not by all that much. And as this headline from Deadline is trying to ask the question and beg the question, really, is this enough to start a franchise? I'm going to go out and say probably not, based off of how much this film actually cost to make, where this film opened internationally, the fact that you do have a lot of competition with John Wick 4 still out, and the Mario film coming out this week as well, which is definitely going to gobble up a huge portion of those ticket sales over the Easter time and over Holy Week. But again, I think that this is a stronger start than expected. And that's obviously because of much stronger word of mouth for this film as to why it was able to do better than those projections. But with a $150 million budget, yeah, not nearly enough for it to be able to have a hope or a prayer of being able to break even, let alone justify its own existence for a franchise. But we, of course, will wait and see what the second weekend numbers look like, which will be a little bit different and a little bit, again, one of those asterisk marks next to it, just like we do with Christmas and with New Year's Eve, right? It's always a little bit different when you have holiday seasons going around because all of them are a little bit different. But as headline from Deadline is pointing out here about Paramount's Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, it's setting at $38.5 million after a 15% decline on Saturday of $13.1 million. Though north of the $30 million tracking, it's below that nice round point of $40 million. Global is better than we expected at 71.5. We had pegged at $65 million. So as you can see, even though it overperformed, it did better than expected, it didn't overperform by all that much. And when you actually go ahead and look at the numbers themselves for the film, at $71.5 million worldwide, it still has quite a ways to go. It's only made about 0.5 times its budget, and typically films need to make somewhere between 2.5 and 3 times its budget to break even. And starting off less than and under $100 million as you're going into a holiday that's going to be dominated by another film, in this case Mario, yeah, let's just say not looking very good for the film going forward. Looking at the top 5 for the week, though, Dungeons & Dragons was able to beat out John Wick Chapter 4 in its second week of release, and so John Wick Chapter 4 dropped 62%, so that's about what's expected for a lot of films that tend to cost $100 million, where there's a lot of people going up front, but not nearly as bad as we have seen other films, especially more recent Marvel films, which have had drops in the 70s to 80s. 62%, definitely not bad. And based off of my own projections, this film is expected to worldwide be able to bring in a decent amount of money, and even potentially might be able to be the highest grossing of the franchise, and that includes when you even adjust for inflation, but we still have to, of course, wait for the final numbers to come in. Still making around $7,000 per screen, making 28.2 versus Dungeons & Dragons 38.5, as you can see, coming out at almost the exact same number of screens. Still very strong performances coming from John Wick, and seeing that they lost, John Wick Chapter 4, that is, lost all of its premium screens, that means most of the IMAX and most of the Dolby and other large format screens to Dungeons & Dragons, it makes a lot of sense as to why there was a decrease in revenue, because obviously people are still going to see the film, but not going to see it in those premium seats, which are now for Dungeons & Dragons, but will soon be taken over by Mario, which is the reason why I think Dungeons & Dragons probably will end up having a pretty decent drop-off in its second week, but we, of course, will have to wait for those numbers to come out. His Only Son, which is a film about Abraham and Isaac and the sacrifice of his son Isaac, and about, again, the temptation of God, or really the testing of God, of the obedience and the faith that Abraham has. That film made $5.3 million in over around 1,900 screens. So I've seen better films, I've seen films do better in this regard when they are more of a Christian type story. So definitely not the most impressive, but hey, $5.3 million made it into the top 3. Scream 6, still in the top 5 this week, $5.3 million, dropping 36%, so still hanging around pretty well. Definitely going to make it to $100 million domestic. Creed 3, rounding off the top 5, still doing well also, so definitely not being hurt all that much by some of the news about one of the co-stars of the film, potentially being in an abusive relationship. Again, a lot of more information has come out since that time, but doesn't look like it had any impact on it whatsoever. And even though it's on the top 5, Shazam in the top 6, dropping from the second place spot, dropping another 49%, 620 screens being dropped from this film in the third week of its release. Yeah, this film already is being talked about being released on digital platforms and physical media within like the next week or so. Yeah, not a good look at all. This film, a massive flop for Warner Brothers, and that is not all that surprising. Dungeons & Dragons at $71.5 million, as I said, is definitely stronger than had been expected, but really only about $5 to $10 million more, and based off of how much that money this film cost to make, Not looking good for it. What is looking very good, though, is John Wick Chapter 4, which is now at $244.8 million. And so, even though this film is definitely going to be competing against itself, right now, it's not too far ahead of where John Wick Chapter 3 was in the same point its release. I'll do a fuller breakdown of the John Wick franchise over on my channel over at OMB Reviews that will already have been live or will be live after this video goes live. And basically just breaking down the fact that the film is doing very, very well. The film is very, very good. As you know, I'm a very big fan of it. I even went and bought the 3-film box set from Best Buy, which is a beautiful looking set. I showed it on Friday Night Tights. But John Wick Chapter 4 doing very well, likely going to easily get to $300 million. And right now, based on my projections, I think it has even a good chance of getting all the way up to $400 million if it is able to have some pretty decent legs. His Only Son only had domestic numbers reported, $5.3 million. I still also, again, not my type of film in general, but the poster also, it just looks so bad. I'm just not interested. Scream 6 at $147.5 million continues to add to its international totals. Creed 3 as well at $258 million. Shazam! Fury of the Gods at $119.5 doesn't have a prayer of getting even close to $200 million, which means the film will be a massive flop. Talking about John Wick Chapter 4's projections, though, with a $244.8 million second weekend, I am projecting, based off of historical standards, the film will end somewhere between $350 million and $489 million at best. So if this film ends up having some incredibly strong leads, which right now, based off of the 62% drop, doesn't seem that likely, especially with more competition coming from films like Mario, I think the film will probably end up getting closer, somewhere between $350 and $400 million by the end of its run. But this is right now the range that I have based off of historical standards. And that means that as far as profits are concerned, it's going to either make around $60 million in net gain profit or as high as $150 million in net gain profit. Again, I think around $100 million net gain profit is most likely, and that is definitely a very good look for the movie. And I'll go ahead and actually update this number too, as when I was putting these numbers in, I forgot to put that in here, because this film, because of the fact of where it currently is only about $3 million in the red. So this film has essentially broken even this weekend. Will definitely be able to make that money that it has left to make over the next day or two, and maybe even in the adjustments of the actual weekend numbers when those get released on Tuesday. And obviously, we do have an early release for the Mario film coming out, I believe, on Wednesday. So very good look for John Wick Chapter 4. It will be easily into the profitability territory by the end of next weekend. I think probably even past $300 million worldwide by the end of next weekend, even in the face of competition. But as you can see, it's doing very, very well after its first 2 weeks. This film at 2.4 times its budget. And as I said, most films need to make 2.5 to 3. So you're looking at least, again, a more conservative estimate. The film is essentially broken even. And if you are taking the more, the higher estimate, then it will still be able to easily do that within the next week or two. Whereas Shazam, at only 86% versus its first 2 weeks, is still $115 million in the red and has no chance of, I mean, again, right now the numbers are so low that this film could end up being a $100 million flop, which again would be one of the, towards the lower end of my projections, but it could actually end up being a chart breaker in the negative direction, meaning worse than even my projections had put out there. Scream 6 at 147 is at $36 million in the black, so again, impressive numbers for that. 65 is still also a film that is a flop at $34 million in the red. Creed 3 continuing to add to its profits, looking probably to get past $50 million in total net gain profits when everything is said and done. And really the only other film that I was able to update was Jesus Revolution, which was at $8 million in net gain profits. So overall, very impressive weekend for John Wick Chapter 4, which is essentially broken even, going into profitability territory very, very soon. But Dungeons & Dragons, what are y'all's thoughts about the film? I know a lot of people have said that it is pretty good, better than what they had expected, but these numbers are not going to be enough for the film to make its money back. Again, the height is... It's just too much money for it to make back, and it's too slow and too small of an opening, especially with the midst of the Easter season coming up and Holy Week coming up and competition being present. It's just not likely going to happen. But what are y'all's thoughts? Do you think the Dungeons & Dragons has a prayer of making its money back? And then also, what are your thoughts about John Wick Chapter 4 as well? How much money do you think it's going to end up being? Again, for me, I'm looking at $350 to $400 million. I think $400 million is actually very likely. But what are y'all's thoughts? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. Whatever it is that you're watching, whatever video platform you're watching on, make sure you smash that like button. You're all amazing, beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful and blessed Palm Sunday, a blessed Holy Week, and as always, God bless.